Hello, welcome to Tales from the Bridge. My name is Tristan.
I'm James.
My name is Sam.
And I'm Kevin. Today on the show, we're going to be talking about some science fiction science fact. I've got a good one. I think that we can all really sink our teeth into. It involves UFOs and controversy. And then we're going to be talking about our book of the month.
And as always, before we get to that, please subscribe, email, send us a review. Let us know what you think of the show. It's really important, and we love to hear from you.
Let's make our way over to the bridge.
So do you guys remember back in 2020, the U.S. Department of Defense released a video of that was on the side of a Navy F-18 Hornet plane of some type of a unidentified flying object that was going really fast and seemingly defying the laws of gravity. And there
I
was
do.
yeah, and there was no explanation for it really, except that it was kind of cool. I guess that video had leaked in 2017, and so the Department of Defense decided to officially release it or at least admit that it was their own footage. And that led to all sorts of speculation about what the U.S. agencies know or don't know about either alien activity or some type of unidentified vehicles that fly through the air. And now, of course, there have been two congressional hearings in the United States about these types of phenomena, and so we've heard a lot of people, quote unquote, experts or people who have experience with these types of, U.S. government initiatives that apparently are secret. And so the reason I bring this up is because November 6th, there was this second congressional hearing where they brought in several other people who were talking about their experiences and their secondhand experience with actually seeing objects from that they can't explain. So there was talk of initiatives in the U.S. government to reverse engineer technology that is seemingly well in advance of human technology. Retired Navy Admiral Tim Gallaudet, who said that he had a copy of that Go Fast video and it mysteriously disappeared from his account, as well as the people that he sent it to, implying that there was some type of people in the background who were deleting emails in the U.S. Navy, which wouldn't be surprised about personally. There was a journalist who was apparently presented a document that was titled Immaculate Constellation that allegedly details a secretive U.S. government program dedicated to the retrieval and reverse engineering of UAP materials, although he wouldn't say where it came from specifically. And there were two other people who talked about some of these things that apparently, like the Go Fast video but there was no actual evidence presented. It was all hearsay. It was all, well, I heard about this, or I saw somebody who told me that they had once seen this initiative, or they've heard stories about. And everybody was so excited about this November 6th congressional hearing. And I don't actually think there was any new evidence presented, just more people talking about evidence that could exist. And am I missing something here, or is this actually not presenting any new information?
I do feel like it's the only watchable political theater happening down in the States right now. It's I'm interested to hear more, but you're right. You're not given there isn't any physical evidence. There's the camera evidence from the F-18 pilots, and I think
It's very cool.
that is very cool and very compelling. There was some attempt to explain that as a sort of phenomenon. I don't really buy that. The What's not clear is like the size of these objects. Like, are they really small? If so, would that make them probes? Like, that's a little more believable. Kevin, we were talking about this the other night. That as you're talking about doing this for science fiction, science fact, and my thinking was if something like this that's the most likely thing is that it's a probe because that's cheap and easy to send across the galaxy, right? You don't have anything to feed or that requires air or any kind of life support. And if you were to wanted to scout out military installations where they're claiming these things happen to be around and see what the capabilities are, then yeah, you send a probe and you make it, you know, you make it draw the attention of the host planet's military to see what their capabilities are. You see if they can chase you, how good their flight characteristics are. Could you shoot them out of the sky? Like if that, I mean, you can go down a rabbit hole of alien invasion pretty quickly. But I think a lot of it is just there's just like you say, we're not really getting shown anything. We're getting hints at stuff, and it's a nice distraction from the other politics happening down in the States. Maybe that's the point.
I
I wish I
feel
had
like
something more intelligent to say. I was hearing myself talk. I'm like, oh yeah, I sound like a whack job. I don't like. I mean, it's a hard topic to even talk about or talk around without feeling weird about it. There is such a stigma attached to it.
well, and we
Or
like to
are you sure you're not just feeling weird, Sam, because you're a Navy veteran and you actually have something to tell us and you're just concealing it tonight? Come on, Sam, tell us what you really
Well,
know.
I'll tell you my UFO story. I was out to sea, and I was sitting on the P-16 crash truck. It was a foggy day. We were so flight ops were suspended. I was gawking up at the sky, and I saw a silver disc doing, moving erratically. I think I've told this story on the show before a long time ago, but and I was like, "What is?" It looks like exactly as described. A flying saucer flying in an inhuman manner is exactly what thought I was looking at, and I guess I'm out on the flight deck. The tower can see me, and I see me gawking up to the sky, and I click, a pry fly crash, and immediately they don't even let me finish. They go, it's a weather balloon. We just launched the weather balloon. Settle down. I was like, oh yeah. They just saw me looking up like a moron, and thinking I had discovered alien life.
but isn't that
Because
the standard thing, Sam? Don't they always say it's a
they
weather
always
balloon?
they do, and everyone goes, well, it can't be a weather balloon. Well, if you're looking at a side profile shot of a weather balloon, it looks like a weather balloon. There's no mistaking it. But when you are directly underneath it, you don't see this big bubble. You just see a disc, a silver disc, and it's moving around a lot because it's getting buffeted by the wind
From
and
left to right and
all
yeah.
over. I mean, you release these things in bad weather to see when the weather's going to clear. So of course, weather's pushing it around, and um, it really, like, I know everyone kind of rolls their eyes when they say, "Well, we think it was a weather balloon." It actually might have been a weather balloon. I can attest at least to that much. That's my big, yeah, uh, naval UFO story. Nothing to write home about, I'm afraid.
Well, I have to agree if they actually had some type of equipment that did anti-gravity, the implications here are like enormous. The amount of energy you could produce. You could basically create a post-scarcity world if we had the ability to, rewrite the laws of gravity. We could create machines that generated infinite energy in essence, depending on how much energy they might use themselves, which is, I guess, a big unknown. And as you say, how would you ever keep that secret? There would be, unless everybody was a complete psychopath, somebody's going to put up their hand and say, "Oh, hey, we have a technology that could revolutionize society as we know it, for everybody." And they might think that that's more important than keeping military secrets in the U.S. government. I mean, that's my feeling, but maybe I'm naive.
Yeah, I'm with you guys on that front. I think after living in the world for a while, 100%. I couldn't have said it better about after three people know the cat's out of the bag. I can't help but think, and the testimony, what we're hearing right now, it does feel weak. It feels very, as you say, it's just words. There's no evidence, and not to sound again like a conspiracy theorist, but if there ever was a time, like it does seem like a convenient distraction again. Is what are we talking about? Even the four of us? Aliens, UFOs, instead of the other thing, which we all need a break from anyway. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I think we probably should just wait till the astrophysicists say we're pretty sure we know what this is, not the Navy, not the government. It's got to be the astronomers and the people who study things that are in the sky. But I will say, the video with the object that seems to be defying gravity, that's wicked.
It is pretty cool.
Get it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, for sure.
Get it?
It's Wicked.
Wicked, define the song, Define Gravity, and this musical Wicked.
Oh,
Yeah,
Oh
Grant.
no.
Oh
there's
man.
more where
Wow.
that came from, guys.
What a
Yeah,
little side pop culture detour that was.
that was niche.
Yeah,
Sorry.
It's okay. I liked it.
it's all right.
So my UAP UFO discussion was not science fiction, science fact. It was more science fiction conspiracy, non-evidence. There's not a lot of fact going on here, but interesting talking point.
We haven't spoken in a while about what we've been reading and watching, so I do have a handful, and then I've got one that I'm actually quite excited about that took me by surprise. So I did get around finally to reading Perdido Street Station by China Miéville, and this had been on my to be read for a long time. So many people think it's a great book, and he's a fantastic writer. So it's my first from China Miéville, and I recommend this book. It's fantastic. It's quite long, but it's right from the start. It's so detailed. His writing is fantastic. The story is weird. It's like a science fiction, but it's also fantasy. It's got a little bit of a horror, a little bit in there, but it's just really neat. I've never read any book like it before that really fused together that science fiction fantasy the way that Perdido Street Station did. And it is the first book in a series, so I may go deeper into that series a little bit later from now. And then I did finally get to Inversions by Ian M. Banks, which was, as always, fantastic. I'm getting close to completing the entire Culture series. I think I've got a couple more to go. So I look forward to getting into those every time. But Inversions was amazing. Banks is, I think it's safe to say, my favorite science fiction writer. Maybe even one of my favorite writers, because The Bridge, which is not science fiction by Ian Banks, is maybe my favorite book. I also enjoyed The Wasp Factory, and so I always love Banks's books. Inversions, without a doubt, one of the best science fiction books I've read in the past year for sure. And then I've got two more, guys. Bear with me here. One is really interesting because this is considered to be one of the first science fiction books ever written. Okay, so the book is called The Blazing World by Margaret Cavendish. This book was published in 1666.
Oh wow.
Wow.
I've heard about this. It's been on many lists that I've read for essential science fiction books to read. It predates Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. Um, Guys, it's not a very long read or listen. If you can get to this, get to it. It's really neat. She breaks down some amazing science. It's uh it's impressive. And it's all very speculative, right? Because this is the 17th century and she's talking about scientific ideas with these animal people. So it's got a bit of a fantasy feel, but she talks about ethics and politics. And they ask her questions. She's from our world and she goes to their world, and it's just really neat. I've never read anything like it, but it is from 1666. So
Wow.
really neat. That's Margaret Cavendish. Highly recommended. Sorry, I'm taking up so much space here, guys, but there's one more book I do want to talk about because this one kind of blew my mind. It's not heavy science fiction, but it's time travel, and I'm happy to say, I read my very first Stephen King book,
Oh.
and the book is 11/22/63. And it's where our main character goes back to 1958 and lives for 5 years to try and stop the murder of JFK. It's just, I was excited to listen to, and I did listen to the audiobook. I was excited to listen to this every time I pressed play. I was actually listening to it when I normally don't listen to audiobooks. I was like, you know what? I'm just going to sit down and listen to it because I want to find out what happens next. I'm really blown away by how well it was written and how intrigued I was every step of the way with the story. It's not, and there's nothing particular about Stephen King's writing except for it's just really entertaining. I can't put my finger on it, guys, but this is my first Stephen King book, and I'm just so impressed.
He's a good author. I mean, a lot of people talk about his books and make his books into movies for a reason. He's and prolific. That guy just writes and writes. Uh, that's good to hear. I'd like to check that one out. In addition to the book of the month, I also read Raft by Stephen Baxter. This is the first book in a series, the Zeely sequence. Stephen Baxter, of course, is a hard science fiction author. We've talked about him on the show before, and I had never read any of his earlier work, and this is a 1991 book. And I liked it. It was different. It was dark. Apparently, this series is really good, and I wanted to get into it. And so I enjoyed it. I thought it was pretty good. I'm definitely going to try to get into the next one in the series when I have time. So I recommend it. It's not contemporary, right? It's a 30 years old, more than 30 years old now, but I thought it was quite good.
And it's got those weird bubble whales or something in space, right? I remember that, and I can kind of still picture them.
Yeah, totally. It's a mystery how humans got into this nebula, but it's a nebula where gravity is stronger than in our universe. So something the size of a house has a gravitational field, and it explores how humans could survive in that type of a nebula. And oddly, the entire nebula, there are stars going through, going going past them. They're very small, very dense, have gravitational fields, but the nebula has air everywhere. So it explores how that could occur. And it also explores concepts of parallel evolution, how different species would evolve in that type of a universe, and how humans could interact with them or not. I mean, he's a thoughtful guy. It's hard sci-fi, but it's not a preachy kind of here's a science lesson. Yeah, so I'm going to keep reading. I'm going to keep reading that one, that series. I also am partway through Stories of Your Life and Others from Ted Chiang. This is a series of short stories, and of course, Ted Chiang is the best short story author I've ever read. And so I've read Exhalation by him before, and those short stories, just every single one of them made my jaw drop. And so this is one that I'm reading. I like to read Ted Chiang's rather than listen because it's so dense, so information heavy, and so much to think about. I haven't quite gotten through all that, but I highly recommend Ted Chiang to anybody who has not seen his work before. And finally, I read one other one called 15 Dogs. This is a Canadian author, I believe, Andre Alexis. And this is a book that explores what would happen if dogs had human level intelligence. And it was a good read. It was recommended to me by my wife. She's been trying to get me to read it for a long time. She said it's a science fiction, and I've put it off. But actually, I really enjoyed it. It was an excellent book.
I will go next. And true to form, I have been a slow and lazy consumer of sci-fi. But I did, so I have a watch recommendation, and it is not sci-fi, but it is in our comic book adjacent genre. And I watched the new HBO series The Penguin, the spin-off of Matt Reeves's Batman, the Batman, I should say, movie, featuring Colin Farrell as Oz Cobb, or the Penguin as we know him. And I thought it was phenomenal. I loved it. I thought the performances were utterly outstanding. I mean, Colin Farrell as the Penguin is something else to see. You can't see any of that, handsome, swaggery Irish movie star in under that makeup. And the accent, the dialect, he's just got it down. But then all the other performances too, Kristen Milioti, and I hope I'm not mispronouncing her name, was phenomenal as Sophia Falcone, a new character that we hadn't seen, but the daughter of, oh gosh, what's his name? Falcone, the crime boss who bought it in the first movie, the Batman. But all around show developed by Lauren LaFranc. Got to give credit to the people behind the scenes as well too. But yeah, twists, turns, violent. It is a gangster saga. There's no secret that the Batman does not appear. It's very grounded, very gritty, violent. But yeah, fantastic series. Highly enjoyed.
So I listened to two books, Heaven's River and Not Till We Are Lost by Dennis E. Taylor. These are the last two novels from the Bobaverse that I wanted to catch up on. And if in the same way, Tristan, you were describing the Stephen King Audible book as a like an Audible page turner, where you revisit it outside of normal Audible hours. So for me, that's outside my car. Um, and yeah, it's just a fun series. It was when I have one of those on the go, I don't mind the drive to work. I park with some small bit of a remorse as I have to go into to the office and leave it behind. If I found myself doing some chores alone in the living room, I put it on the speaker and listen to it. It's just fun to listen to. So I've been enjoying that. And I'm just finishing up Lords of Uncreation, which is the final architecture uh, novel 3 of that series by Adrian Tchaikovsky. So that's been fun too. I'm kind of happy to wrap that one up. I'm at the point though where I'm a little bit ready to put that one down, but it's definitely a bit of an acid trip. Anything by in that series, and it's a lot of fun. I do recommend it. Uh, but the aliens are just way out there, and it gets sort of spiritual towards the end. And not to do any spoilers, but lots of fun. And yeah, so that's sort of been my reading. Of course, now last episode I shared. I was talking about reviewing a graphic novel called The Hunger and the Dusk. It's still making the rounds, so we will get to that. But it's we'll talk about that. Listeners, anyone who took note of that at a later date, but it's still sort of getting passed around just because, as you can tell from everyone who's just spoken, we've been taking in a lot of stuff. As well as the book of the month. And maybe I'll use this as a segue to open up that conversation. So this month we read Mercy of Gods by James S.A. Corey. This is the pseudonames for Daniel, Abraham, and Ty Frank. They wrote The Expanse, which if you're a regular listener of the podcast, you know we've spoken about at great length. We're all big fans of that series and of the TV series, or at least I am a big fan of that TV series. So The Mercy of the Gods is new world, new everything. And it's the first book in a 3-part series called The Captives' War. And on its surface, this is a story about an alien race that invades and subjugates a planet populated by humans. But the approach for me felt fresh. The style is low key, and the violence of the invasion quickly moves from the kinetic to the psychological in a way that feels both new and familiar at the same time, if that makes any sense. It's very reminiscent to me of the slave narratives from the 18th and 19th centuries. The protagonists in this book are herded onto a ship and brought to an alien world where they must prove their worth if they wish to be fed and to survive. So we follow this cadre of human scientists who are required to work on technology that will allow for food to be shared across different species and thus better enable the alien empire to subjugate worlds as it colonizes the galaxy. The humans in this story are themselves distant colonists of the planet from which they are taken because it's not Earth. And in fact, they are leading research that allows them to coexist on planets to which they are not native. So there's certainly some irony here and a bigger fish in the sea sort of reference at play. But overall, I found it to be a compelling story. I'm looking forward to the upcoming books and the Amazon series that may follow. Tristan, if shared an article on our Facebook page with news that the authors have teamed up with the former showrunners of The Expanse to form a production company that will transition their books to the screen. And I think it's a pretty fantastic idea. For me, the idea of a purpose-built science fiction franchise from the ground up that can be seamlessly transitioned from book to screen creates a lot of room to faithfully realize a creative vision. Think of how often a great book is ruined on the screen. So I think this partnership could go a long way to preventing that. Um, and think also of how successful these showrunners were in bringing the Expanse to life. I think this is the team to pull that off with this new series. So I've got high hopes, and I'm looking forward to seeing how this turns out. Anyways, I'm also very curious to see to hear what the rest of you thought about it.
I surprisingly, even to myself, am going to be a little bit of a bummer myself. And it may be, I may have had some, prejudice going in, or unexpected, unfulfilled expectations, knowing that these were the authors of The Expanse. And when I got into it, and clearly very well written, big world building. But then it wasn't the same sort of adventure, fun kind of thrilling romp that The Expanse was, that the first book in The Expanse gave to me. It was, utterly different story, at least on the surface. Yeah, maybe I just felt it was a bit grim. I don't know. It felt kind of harsh, and just I felt like it was a slog to read in some ways. Again, despite the fact, although I will say there were times when I was so impressed with the writing, and there were some really clever turns of phrase and interesting passages. But then other times I felt like it was kind of overwritten as well too. There were times where I just thought, okay, this chapter needs to end or this passage needs to end, because it felt a little overcooked. For my purposes, there were, a lot of POVs, which maybe split my focus a little bit, and I didn't. And maybe this betrays my simple-mindedness, but I I was also kind of looking for a character to grab onto as my protagonist, my likable character. And I know who it's supposed to be, but it didn't quite get me there. So yeah, I think it'll be, I mean, the one thing they did do, they painted the picture so well. Like I could visualize the whole thing so clearly. The Carracks, the antagonists were terrifying, even just in book form. Um, so I think visually on the screen, if they have the budget, and I hope they do, it'll be fantastic. Yeah, really well done book. If you're in the right mood, maybe I just wasn't in the right mood, because it was certainly a lot darker than The Expanse. I wish I could write something of the same quality, but yeah, unfortunately, just didn't grab me the same way.
Do you think the book was written with them knowing that this was going to be a TV deal? Like, is this something like I wonder with these writers being so successful and having so many connections with filmmakers now and television producers.
It's certainly
Um,
possible.
so I wonder if that affected this a little bit because they're like, well, it doesn't matter because we make all the money off the show, not the book. That's me just assuming here. But I do find it interesting that you said you could visualize everything, James, because I could visualize the things that happened. I could visualize the little creatures and some of the places they were, but the main setting of this place was on the planet and in this city. I couldn't visualize the city at all. It just seemed like they were talking about being on these streets, and I'm like, well, what do these streets look like? And like, there's tall buildings apparently, but it's like I just like I don't know where I am.
It's funny, just to interject, it's funny you should say that, because in my mind's eye, when I imagine them as very neutral. Like they're colorless, their features are
Yeah,
almost it's
yeah,
almost
Me
like
that's what
too.
I did.
brutalist
Bland
architecture.
white. Yeah.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Exactly.
that's what I did naturally as well. But maybe because it just wasn't simply explained too well. I don't understand how the people were in that situation and weren't far more curious. It seemed like they were like, "Oh, we got kidnapped. This sucks." And it was like the curiosity and like the will to figure stuff out. There was just no will to figure stuff up. They were just kind of like just victims, and they kind of tried, but then I don't know. I don't know. I just felt that the character's a little bit unbelievable. I didn't miss their home planet, Anjin, because we didn't spend any time there. We had like an opening chapter and that was it. I didn't know what it was. Was it like Earth? Was it? I feel like I should have missed the place with them, that they're home, and I just didn't. I didn't even have a chance to enjoy anything because they were just captured right from the start. And it's like, okay, so we're captured from the start. If and am I correct in the main characters don't know? I'm gonna get nitpicky here. I do the main characters know where they came from? Do they know about Earth,
No.
or have
No,
like
yeah,
they've totally
it's
forgotten about Earth?
yeah, it's like a myth. Like, but there was some, I think, government change or some political thing where their past is hidden from them or something. It's sort of
Okay.
alluded to. Yeah.
Because they do refer to themselves as primates a lot, which happens in the Expanse series a lot. Like throughout that whole series, the authors are constantly talking about how we're just primates, and that happened a lot in this book too. So I'm just curious about, okay, so how do we know we're primates if we don't even remember the planet we're from? Because we definitely wouldn't have. I guess they've figured it out some other ways. Now I'm sounding nitpicky. I'm sorry, guys.
It's okay.
Um, but I'm not disappointed, but I was just hoping for more. A couple other things. It was not funny. There was nothing charming about this book. Even the character Campar, who was supposed to be the comic relief, just wasn't funny. Like he just was kind of a geek that tried to be funny, and it was almost annoying. And I wonder if the story or if the novel itself is suffering from just what the authors lost in moving to something other than the Expanse, because in the Expanse the stories are divided into small perspectives, right? You have multiple character perspectives in every book, and in this one we just have chapters. And I wonder if that took away from the authors being able to focus on their characters and write the story from their perspective. And then we just have one narrative, and it was just it was something lost in that new approach for them. My final note that
Sorry to interrupt. That's an interesting point. I hadn't caught on to that.
yeah, um, the last note that I do have here is that my last note says good enough ending. Unfortunately, I don't remember the ending, so I don't know where that note came from. I'm pretty sure they were like, "All right, guys, we're gonna fight back," and that was something like that. But refresh me on the ending. I
Yeah.
find that funny that that
uh,
was my final note, though.
I agree. In fact, that ending, it was that. It was Daffod emotionally saying, "I'm gonna get you, Carrix," basically the alien species. That it's implied that even though he has gained the trust of the Carrix, he is going to figure out a way to undermine. And I think he actually said he's going to destroy them. And that's alluded
Yeah,
to. Like there's throughout the book, there's a retrospective narrative from the future talking about how Daffod was an insurrectionist. And so it's setting itself up. So just to follow up, Tristan, like I this book in my mind was part of a series, and the end of the first book did not satisfy. It really requires book two, book three, and so like you guys, I was also thinking about comic relief and endearing characters, and I didn't really see that, and it was definitely dystopian and dark when compared to The Expanse. And this book, I think, was setting up a lot for the readers to hate the Carricks, the antagonist species. If if we were to come out of this book with nothing else, it's that that species is terrible, and it's totally fine for us to destroy them. So, if and when there becomes the opportunity for that to occur, the readers are probably going to just cheer it on, and there's going to be very little sympathy for that species. And so, that end, that cathartic moment, I think, Tristan, when Daffod says, "I'm gonna kill you all," probably the readers are all shaking their fists and saying, "Rah, rah."
like finally,
Yeah, finally, we've been
last
subjugated.
paragraph, finally.
That's right. That's right. So I agree with a lot of it. I did enjoy it. Like I don't mind dystopian books. I don't mind dark books. It did start really dark. With 1/8 of the population of the planet, being killed. Um, but it also did a lot of the scenes really stick in my mind, like that city that is hard to visualize, the city planet that's hard to visualize. I can imagine a scene of all these different alien species going through the halls and them looking in different ways, doing different tasks. All of them also being subjugated by the Carricks and part of this empire, alien empire. Um, and uh, and I think there are also some interesting moral quandaries here. Like James, you mentioned the idea of no, no, Sam, you mentioned the idea that humans themselves are modifying their biomes and trying to I guess not
Yeah.
subjugate species isn't the best way to put it, but
Well, they're colonists who are then colonized, right? Like, and
Right.
so there's an interesting play there that I thought stood out for me, and that ends up being a key to their survival.
Hmm. Yeah, right on. And so that juxtaposition of where we feel such pain and animosity towards the Carricks, who are doing in essence what we kind of do. The argument, the difference is of course that these are sentient species, and we think that the species that we eat maybe aren't, but that's open to debate, right?
Although on that point too, there were multiple references from the Carricks referring to humans and the other species as animals.
Good
So
point.
I
Yeah.
think they do very much see us as lower, lesser us. I
Mhm.
said us, humans as yeah, as non-sentient, really, which is debatable, but they certainly address that, and I think that. Yeah, shades of that do make sense now that you guys talk about that and the colonizers being colonized. That those are good shades that I hadn't really picked up on. Maybe just because I felt a little too sloggy, but good layers for sure.
I always do find that whenever I'm slightly underwhelmed by one of the books we read, after talking about it though, it does breathe new life, like you guys are doing right now, where it's like, yeah, yeah, I'm not, I don't mean to be the downer, but at the same time, I had issues, or at least couldn't get past a few things, and then you guys bring up more that's like, no, 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 I do enjoy this, so I appreciate that angle for sure.
Well, it's the
It's
benefit of a book club, right?
That's right. And the second read through is always better than the first, I find, because you pick up so much more. The other thing that I wanted to point out about the book that I really liked and wanted to hear more about is the swarm, right? This other rebellious species that is fighting the Carricks and we do get one space battle story, more than, well, we get two really, but there's a second space battle story that talks about this swarm, this insurrectionist species that really has a chance of beating the Carricks in some context. And so it's setting itself up for a really good storyline. I want book two. I will 100% read book two in this series.
I
I
will too.
I will totally admit to rooting for this book out of bias for being such a fan of The Expanse, for sure. I think, but I'm reminded also that my least favorite book in The Expanse was the first book,
Mm.
and I would even say the second. It's the third book where it really picks up. So my only fear is that three books is not enough for this series to really pick up. But I was fine with it. I know it was different. I think now, like you say, Tristan pointed out, like, each chapter in The Expanse is one character. It's Jim, and you get Jim's perspective on events, and then you go to another character, and that's a device I quite like, and it worked really well for The Expanse. And yeah, you're right, they moved away from that in this, and so it does feel different in a lot of ways. But I still enjoyed it. I'm still rooting for it, but I'm also I need number two to be pretty killer. But like I said, I still really enjoyed this one. I got through it, and I enjoyed reading it. For me, I think um, as I was looking into it, when I saw someone reference the slave narratives, that to me was like what clicked. And so I already sort of placed a lens on it that I had a personal interest in, or a kind of historical interest in. And so that was sort of how I took it. And I was sort of prepared for it to be dark and an unhappy and difficult space to kick off in. I knew it wasn't going to be a bunch of good friends romping around the galaxy in their spaceship. Like, this was going to be a different type of story. Um, but yeah, so well, anyways, that really actually all your takes really did help, because a couple of things too, like the city. I imagine the city is this sort of lush, almost village like town, but again, I'm painting the picture on myself. This is how I see the world. Maybe I'm just like
Well, it's interesting how
rose-colored
underdescribed it
glasses.
was then, and how intentional that is, though. If we all see the city differently, well, that was because of the lack of description by the authors, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's a very good point.
So we have a new book to read, folks, for next month.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
Ooh.
yeah, so I guess it's my pick. And I've been, there are all sorts of good books that I wanted to recommend, but I wanted to keep it contemporary. I wanted to keep it light, and I wanted to introduce something new, something that we haven't read before, not a part of a series, and something that we haven't actually really talked about. Um, and I really like Adrian Tchaikovsky, who has been on our show a couple times and is an excellent author, prolific author. And he's written so many different books of different genres. And in 20 this year, he released a new novel, a standalone novel. And the one I'm going to recommend is called Service Model. And it is a short read, and it is I've already actually listened to it, and I recommend it. I'm one of these guys who it's hard for me to tell whether a book is young adult or not. I would almost say that this one could border on being young adult. It's very accessible. It's humorous. It is there's a lot of allegory. You can really read a lot into his writing. It's satirical about society. And it's basically it follows a robot, a bumbling robot, who's trying to make his way through a post-apocalyptic world where humans are in die-off, and it talks about robot society and robot motivations. It's almost like if anybody's ever read Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse, it's almost like a the life of the prototypical robot trying to figure out what its purpose is when its purpose goes away. And anyway, so he's experiencing the extremes of robotness, try to figure out what his correct path is. And so I recommend it. And I here's another recommendation, and I may have already mentioned this, but Adrian Tchaikovsky actually did the narration in the audiobook himself, and he's excellent. He does there's so many Britishisms, British comedic elements that if not delivered properly by a British person who knows, they wouldn't have sounded quite as eloquent and quite as funny. So I loved it. So I hope you guys do too. That's my recommendation for this month.
All right, great.
Nice. So I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the episode. We sure did. Lots more coming your way on Tales from the Bridge. Great interviews, great conversation, more books, more movies, more everything. Thank you again. Until next time.